What's up, everybody? Give it just a little bit longer. Get some people in here. Today's going to be a deep one. I love it. I loved it. Right on. You're going to need a suit for this one. um, I don't know how to say this without like sounding like a total dickhead, but um, I spent the last couple days, you know, I think like we all have, of just digesting a bunch of streams and videos about the DLC and different people's takes on it. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like uh, most of the community um, is like more lost than ever. Um, Even some of the really big name and people that I respect the hell out of, I feel like they are like I don't know how to say this, but like I feel like they're not even close, and I could very much be wrong, right? Like I could be interpreting things totally, totally backwards. And I don't mean like they're not even close in like a negative way, but I feel like they're the focus that I've seen on other channels and kind of the way that they're digesting it just seems, I don't know, like the community is more lost than ever. And there's certain things that are really, really, really surprising to me that have not become mainstream. Um, like, you know, this channel we've been focusing on, depth psychology and how that applies to the game and the real deep meaning of the game. And in my, I don't know, in my humble opinion, I feel like we're closer on this channel um, than a lot of others, and it's really surprising. And I'm not saying that to like toot my own horn, but it's really surprising that some of the thoughts have not become more mainstream. Um, like even Shadow of the Erdtree. We predicted a year ago that it was going to be like a shadow realm where everything was the direct opposite of what the Golden Order in America and kind of her consciousness, and it was relegated into the shadows, and it was going to be a mirror realm, like all this different type of stuff. And people are still, even in like the analysis of the DLC, like they still, I don't know, like they're surprised by it, and they're still kind of like, I don't know, it's just it was very like eye opening to me, like, oh, okay, like still still a lot of I don't know, progression, forward movement to be had. I feel like in kind of the mainstream community. Um, and again, I'm not trying to throw shade or like downplay anybody else's stuff, because all of their stuff is crazy amazing. But I feel like the DLC for me, and I feel like for this channel, really answered a lot of questions and like solidified um, the kind of guesses that we had and the opinions that we've had for a year now. And we're like, oh, okay, like this makes sense. This is what the story is being told, and this is going to be the end of it. And that seemed to really throw people for a loop. And I don't know, I was just really caught off guard. And I, as I was preparing for this video, um, like it just kind of kept cascading into the story of the whole game. I feel like a lot of the DLC analysis that I watched were like just the DLC, and I feel like they failed to put it into context of the game as a whole. And today, my goal is that by the end of this, we have a really good understanding of what the base game is about, and the DLC trailer, even though it's only 3 minutes, how much information that we can gather from it, and what we can expect to move forward and to really get a handle on this lore. Um, Again, total disclaimer, could be 100% wrong. No idea, no idea. Um, but I will say, a lot of what we've watched as a community in the last 72 hours or whatever has been the concept of like as above, so below. Like people are finally, you know, um, kind of coming to terms with that. And that was the very first image that I ever presented in any, like the very first lore video I made was no tree uh, can reach a heaven without the roots going down to hell, and that's exactly what we see with this DLC. So, if you didn't watch part one, basically part one we covered the IGN interview and then like 80% of the trailer. And today, although I'll cover more the rest of the trailer, and then I also wanted to talk about the other interview. And there's things in there like Miyazaki was super straightforward and more willing to give information than ever before, and I think having a context to put that up against is important. So. From first time I saw your theory, it was the one. I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. Um, so I don't really know how I'm going to structure this, to be completely honest. What you're looking at now is basically like it's a visual representation of what's inside my brain right now, and it's like 10% of it. Um, and basically, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, or if you're new to this channel, it might be a little bit difficult, but basically, this story of Elden Ring is about like awakening and spiritual and psychological growth and um, basically becoming your inner god, which is something that is prevalent in each and every single one of us. It's not. I don't believe that it's a story literally about an eternal God and her demigod children. I think that that's just the medium that is being told to, like, how it's being told to us. Just like in Bloodborne, like, if you play the game at the surface level, it seems like a story about Lovecraftian gods and all this crazy shit. And then if you dig into it a little bit, you understand that it's really just about this queen named Yarnum who had a terrible thing happen to her, and her consciousness is still unsettled because of it. That is basically the same thing that's happening here. And in the DLC, what we're doing is we are going down into this basically nightmare realm, into the shadow realm, into the unconscious, and we are facing the traumas that America has been a part of and has been presented with, and the things that she's relegated to the shadows and the things that she's chosen to focus on. And it's something that we all do, right? Like, we all choose to develop our ego and develop our consciousness in a way that shines a light on our positive attributes and hides away and seals away the negative ones. Um, and there's no difference in here with what America is doing. And a part of that is like what Goldmass says is like even gods, are I forget the exact quote. Somebody can tell me, but even gods are faulty of human emotions or whatever that is. Like it's the fly in the ointment, and we're all just human beings going through stuff, and how we deal with it um, is how our lives are directed um, and how we operate within the world. So I'm just going to assume that by this point, if you're watching this, you have basically done your research and you've watched or you've read all the interviews and you've watched the trailer a bunch of times. And basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the trailer and we'll talk about the board you see here, a little tip of the hat to Quelaag, and we'll go in game and all this different type of stuff. But in the theory here presented on this channel, what I've suggested for a while now is that America lost her real life child, and the elements that we see when we get thrust into the game are her consciousness as she is recovering and dealing with that trauma, and there are so many contextual clues, narrative clues, environmental clues that point us to this significant trauma of child loss and what that would do to a person and how somebody would move forward from that. And I believe that the endings are the different ways that America moves forward from that. So we'll get into it, but that's important to know. So I'm going to start this here with this quote by Jung. That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. So basically what this quote is saying is that the more that we hide away and repress certain aspects of ourselves, and the more that we try to seal those things in a vault and never deal with them, the more and more that they will come to direct our lives. And we don't know why, and we don't know how, but in like the real world, we would start acting out, we would start maybe drinking more, we would start maybe taking drugs, we would, and we wouldn't really know why, because we have locked away the trauma that we're hiding from. It's super common in psychology and in therapy to, if somebody comes in with an issue, it's more than likely a trauma that they're not even aware of, right? And it's about healing that trauma, understanding that this is a part of their lives, accepting it, showing love to it, and then healing from that and moving forward. And that is exactly what I believe Ronnie is doing. Like, I believe fate, right, is this, the map, like I've said a million times, is a human fetus in a womb. And the significance of that, as far as just the story and then alchemy and all sorts of stuff, rebirth, transformation, it like overshadows everything else. Like, Miyazaki is putting a big fat baby in front of our face, and I feel like it's not even being mentioned in any other lore videos, and it absolutely blows my mind. But oh crap, I kind of lost what I was saying. Oh, so Ronnie's quest, right? You have to defeat Radon, which is very similar to what we have to do in this DLC. And that is because Radon is the element of resistance, right? It's the element of staying loyal and staying resistant to any sort of change, or acknowledging the fact that there's some other shit that is locked away in the closet that you don't want to deal with. And you have to defeat him before fate can move forward, right? it literally crashes and makes a hole down into uh, this map, this fetus, where you go down deeper and deeper until you uncover this hidden uh, um, this hidden weapon that can release you from basically the two fingers, the greater will, and your. And in my opinion, Ronnie's ending is basically it's akin to suicide. Like you're basically just ending everything. Um, but the fact that you have to defeat Radon, Moog is like a given because he's right there. It tells you like you still have to set in motion, and you still have to defeat this incredibly powerful emotion in us, this resistance to change, which is literally what plagues most of the world. And you have to get over that. You have to defeat that part of yourself before you can move on. It basically what it does is when you do that is it lifts the veil of and allows you to move forward into kind of that darkness and allows you to sit in that darkness and understand it and heal from it and all this different type of stuff. Um, so now I think, you know, speaking of the Shadowlands and the map as a fetus, um, and Ronnie would be the umbilical cord. So it's possible that Ronnie is that real life dead baby, right? It's very possible. But what's important is that if the Shadowlands, which I believe sit in this kind of area, right, which is obscured by this cloud here, and it's been a mystery for people from the very beginning, and it's literally at the base of the Erdtree, so it would be in the shadow of the Erdtree. Um, if this is it, then this would symbolize the connection between the fetus and the mother, right? It would be the umbilical cord. It would be like it's the life giving thing, the nutrients where everything comes from for that baby to survive. And we know now after the DLC trailer that it seems to be the Crucible, right? The elements of Crucible are overt and saturate everything that we see within the DLC trailer. So it's literally the beginning of everything, where everything was still together, uh, and there was no division or fractures. Everything was kind of living um, in unity and in wholeness. And that makes perfect sense for if this is where it's at, which it like everything would say that this is where it's going to be at. It makes total sense, and we'll cover more about why also this makes sense in alchemy and what the womb means in alchemy. But just understanding that little bit, right? It to me, I feel like it adds a layer of understanding of okay, so if this represents America, if the fetus represents America, and then the Shadowlands, where she first stepped foot and became a quote unquote god, and where the crucible is, that would represent like her mother, like the placenta, the umbilical cord, the womb, all this different type of stuff, where everything that was a part of her was kind of congealed together before structure and order kind of took place, and consciousness and ego split out from the shadow. Um, Now, another really interesting aspect is it's kind of um, let me pull this up. So for a while now, and you know on this channel we talk about how the Erdtree represents Marika's ego and it's her consciousness, and it's no surprise that right next to the Erdtree, the capital, is a scan of a brain, and it's a fully developed adult brain, and the um, uh, fortified manor, which the Round Table hold is uh, resembled after, and kind of like in this subconscious realm outside of everything else, sits right in the middle of this kind of structure of her brain structure. And deep in the middle of this brain structure is what is called the thalamus. And the thalamus regulates consciousness. It regulates like sleep and wake cycle. And it's also like the deepest, oldest part of our brain. And it's considered kind of our reptilian brain. And if you know anything about the brain structure, it's like there's a few different, you can see kind of like the stages of development throughout history, that reptilian brain, mammalian brain, and then kind of what we have now is like this very evolved brain. But it's also no wonder that right on top of this structure, the thalamus, which is the fortified manor, is grand sex. And the reptilian brain, being the thalamus, which regulates consciousness, and it's our deepest part of it, and the crucible and the dragons having connections. Yet again, it's like, oh, the fact that he's there, right, and he is trying to rebel against the Erdtree and the conscious ego. Again, it adds a layer of like, okay, that makes sense. But let's just look at this brain structure, and we see here the wall, which is the cranium, and then we have the gray matter. There's no other like body of water that has like the wrinkles like a gray matter. Like it if you pull up a brain scan, it looks just like this. So you even have the cerebellum here, which happens to be the Colosseum. Cerebellum is about movement and coordination, and this is where fighting took place. So yet again, like, so much detail in this map, it blows my mind. And I cannot wait to see what they do with the DLC map. It's got to be something really interesting. So if we look at this, right, and this is kind of her adult brain, where she has established herself, where she is her quote-unquote god of this land, which is what the ego does, right? Like when an ego gets out of control, it thinks itself a god. And especially if you don't even acknowledge your shadow self is what when your ego gets super inflated and it becomes egomaniacal and narcissistic, the shadow will take it down a notch and be like, hey, dude, you're still a human being. Like, you still have these flaws. You are not a perfect person. But because America has locked away this part of herself, her ego has nothing to counterbalance it. So it grows and grows and grows, and it continues to think that itself is a god, and there's nothing wrong with it until, like that first quote we talked about, where your things that you repress will come to your life, and it will be called, you will call it fate. So the events of the Night of the Black Knives, Death Root, all this different type of stuff is the Shadow's way of like, hey, we're still here. You're not a god. You need to kind of cool your jets, and you need to come back, and you need to find your roots where it all started. And that's exactly what we're doing in the DLC. But the picture of this brain, fully formed, and then we have talked about on this channel that, and this is kind of a bad picture, but we have talked about on this channel that the Fair Missoula is America's childhood. And the picture of, or the statue of the little girl and the three wolves and the Elden ring above her is her literally becoming a god, because she is separating herself from her ego and her shadow. And she is locking away her shadow. She's locking away the unstructured, like, chaotic side of herself, and she is only ego at that point. And that is where she becomes a literal god. And that happens to people all the time. I'm sure that there is a political candidate that you might think, that might come to mind, that if you asked this person if they thought themselves a god, they might say yes. And this is exactly what narcissism and ego inflation is. So if we look at the map of Fair Missoula, and this is flipped 180 degrees. You see a very, very similar structure to what we see in Lindell. You see the outer wall, you see kind of the middle part here, but it's all crumbling and faded, and you see the cerebellum where you fight Malekith, and you see kind of the same. It's a very similar structure, but what's interesting about it is that it's crumbling, it's fading, and if you think about your personal childhood, if you are 30, 40 years old, your personal childhood is going to, like, if you try it, like if you could take a scan of your brain as you're trying to think of a memory in your childhood, it's going to look like this. It's faded and it's distorted and it's crumbling, but yet there is something that is still very well kept and that America is very, very aware of, and that is Malekith and what she did in that room, and the fact that that is the point in time where she separated herself and focused just on order and just on ego and locked everything else away. And I thought that I was kind of like looking at it, trying to find connections to this, and to me, that is a direct connection to the fact that this is more than likely where America came from. And if where'd that go? If this is the Badlands, and this represents everything that America has repressed, and if you've watched any of my videos, repressed means like it happened in your life, but you don't even know, you have no memory of it. You've repressed that memory, and it takes a deep psychological dive, right, and uncovering to find and heal that trauma. But there's other elements where it could be that you know of a certain thing in your childhood that you wish you didn't, but it's still in your conscious awareness, right? And I believe that if Fair Missoula split off from anywhere, it would have split off from the Badlands. And I think they put this in the base game to give us enough contextual clues about exactly what was going on in America's life and where this place originally came from, and the lord that Mikola is waiting for, and that Placidusax is waiting, or the god that Placidusax is waiting for to return. And the fact that it's in this like island in this chaotic memory filled place, it makes the most sense to me. This is super oversimplified. Yeah, of course it is. This isn't a... Okay, let's see here. Disagree on Ronnie's ending there. Oh no, I see your thinking on this theory. But I think you're getting mixed up on what shadow entails speaking in terms of young. The womb archetype is relevant, but its function has specificity that doesn't necessarily work here. Part of what you're saying is correct, but the base assumption of America equals ego somewhat misunderstands the self archetype, specifically relating to the rotundum. America being the ego likewise does not fit along with the individuation-related transcendent functions Jung describes. Yeah, of course. I mean, what's up, Raze? First of all, yeah. I mean, if we're gonna talk about depth psychology, and like, if I was to give a lecture on depth psychology, it would take like weeks. Like I can't give a crazy detailed explanation for everything here. It hinges on identification with mania, psychic energy archetypes, / giants being a good example of inflation-related Newman. God complexes and ego inflation aren't exactly the same thing. The former is identification with the self archetype. The later is identification with... Granted, the self is, of course, undifferentiated and inclusive of all other archetypes by definition. Yeah, Grays, I see what you're doing here, but I think that you are like yeah, I agree with Douglas there. Like Miyazaki, although he could be taking a lot of inspiration from Jung and human psychology, I don't think that it's fair to assume that he has the same level of like understanding, or me by that, you know. Um, but it could still, the concepts could still hold true. Um, old Placiducex is another example of something that was originally five, yep, but split into three and two, yep, which is, in my opinion, why he's part of like the ego consciousness, because that's all about order. We don't know that he is sure, but in my experience, you will stumble into his name fairly quickly when looking into alchemy, mythos, craft. And there's a lot of arguments to back up Jung being directly used in the world building. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, what's up, dude? Yeah, yeah. This is not a Jungian depth lecture. I'm trying to do my best to connect depth psychology in the game without like overcomplicating it. So there's definitely things in here that, as far as Jung and depth psychology, like sure we could get super granular and look at it and be like, but in I think if you're like if you're trying to communicate it in a more digestible way, this is kind of the only way to do it. But by all means, like I would be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on it. Yeah, God complexes and ego inflation are exactly the same thing. Yeah, yeah, I understand that. Yep. Uh, and I disagree with you about the identification with the self archetype, because the self is like your inner true God, but you can still identify with strongly with something else that isn't your inner God. Anyways, um, oh God, now I don't remember what I was talking about. So, anyways, I think that there's enough, again, contextual clues, environmental clues, storytelling clues to assume that this was a piece of America's consciousness, right? That split off when she chose to lock away her shadow and basically go in the direction of her like ego consciousness. Um, that seems to be the very beginning of her story as a god. And this Fair Missoula in this theory would have originally been part of the Shadowlands, right? Kind of the crucible where everything took place, and then from there split off, and everything that wasn't a part of that consciousness got relegated to the Shadowlands. Okay, so and we've talked about as above so below, and kind of the upside down world, and it's the same but different, and all this different type of stuff. And Miyazaki quote here is, it takes place in the same time as the main title, which is really important because it is just telling us that it's a mirror dimension, that as we are doing stuff above, right above the surface, things are happening below the surface. Um, Setting is not in the distant past or future. The Shadowlands and Queen America's past will be told in the same manner as the Shattering was in the main title of the game. Um, so this was no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Was the very first image that I put up in my very first lore video. And I think it's really interesting here to note that there is these two rings that are, one is supposed to represent the consciousness, right, like the ego, and the other is supposed to represent the shadowy unconscious. And what's in between them is this mixture of kind of gray. And we've talked a lot about on this channel that that seems to be where the lands between operates, because if it was all ego, you wouldn't see dragons or misbegottens or omen. Like, you wouldn't see all this stuff. You wouldn't see weird, strange, chaotic creatures. You wouldn't see tibia mariners, like all this different type of stuff that seems to literally pop up from the shadow. And if it was just the shadow, which is what we're going to see soon, it would operate in a much different vein. But it seems that where we are at is in between these two kind of spheres, these two worlds. This blend between order and consciousness and the ego and everything golden, and then the unconscious chaotic structure of the unconscious and shadow. And again, like, I think if you go back and you play the game, you'll find that this is it's the world that we're in is really strange, because you will have like very normal creatures like a ram or a squirrel run by you, and then like a dragon will drop down, and it makes you wonder, like, okay, well, what, like, we are in this kind of limbo between these two worlds. And he also, Miyazaki, kind of hinted at there's a small hidden meaning in the title that we hope we figure this out when playing the game. And I think it's just exactly that. Like, I think Shadow, the Shadowlands, is literally meant to be like the shadow of psychological shadow, and not just like a physical shade or shadow from the Erdtree, but a very psychological shadow. And so here's a couple different, here's a couple different models of the Jungian psyche. And this one in particular seems to really show, I mean, they both do, right? But again, like, where we are at, the ego persona seems to be everything golden, Lindell, the Erdtree, Godwin, like all this different type of stuff. And then where the self is would be kind of like the lands between. But what's really interesting is that this is also where Melina, who I believe is the self, kind of, she is trying to find her way back to the foot of the Erdtree. And she is really like disconnected from her purpose and what she's doing and how she got there and all this different type of stuff. But what's more interesting is that in this shadow realm comes the anima and animus. And we have talked, kind of at length about the animus as being the Elden Lords, and that they come from kind of this shadowy, unconscious realm. And this is why I believe that Radagon has red hair, and that why in the trailer so many things are either shaded red, have red hair, all this different type of stuff is because they literally come from this place. But again, we will cover that more as we get to it. But I thought it was a good like visual representation of, okay, why does Radagon have red hair? Well, Marika and her shadow clearly cast down fire and giants, right? Like, that is a antithesis to the Erdtree and to kind of her ego persona. So there's an aspect of them that will be locked down there. And omens and the crucible, like all this different type of stuff, dwell in this shadowy unconscious. So anything that comes out of it is going to have some sort of visual representation that this is where they came from. And I believe that's why Radagon has red hair. Okay. So this is what we were talking about a little bit ago, as far as this Fair Missoula, if it was originally part of the Badlands, and it split off when this event occurred right here, when the Crucible was no longer containing her ego, and her ego split off from basically herself, right, from the Crucible, and from that came order and the opposites of order and chaos, good and evil, ego and shadow, consciousness and unconsciousness, like all these different types of things, which is the symbol of that is being shown here. And you can see like the very beginnings of this orderly ego consciousness being formed from the chaotic unconscious. And then as we further develop and we kind of go back to Lindell and the Golden Order, and she's much more mature and more fully developed as evidenced by the structure of the brain, you see that at this point the Elden Ring has totally come up from the Crucible or the Shadow, and it is no longer connected, and she is no longer in balance at all, and she is only operating kind of in this very one-dimensional space. And we've talked about it before on this channel, but you see that as evidenced by her hair as well. Her hair starts out with just one long braid down one side of her, and then as she's going through this process, she starts to develop another braid on the other side of her hair. And most of the statues in game have one long braid on one side and then kind of a half braid on the other side. And it's just another visual representation of, okay, she is going through this process, but she's not yet completed because she still has to integrate her shadow side. And this is kind of just like all over the place. I don't really have like a structure to this. Sorry. Let's catch up here. Let's see. As much as I would also love for dissect to be way simpler, I don't think I can make it simpler, and I feel like it needs to be that level of detail because that is what ER seems to be built on. I totally agree. Yep, I agree. Sorry, but I haven't heard anyone mention that Frenzy Flame Sigil on the collector's edition box. Any thoughts on how Frenzy Three Fingers will fit into the new DLC? I actually believe that is the Dragon Communion. Let's see here. Elden Ring sigils. Like, I believe what we're seeing is that right there. And the fact that, I mean, it's also very related to the Flame of Frenzy sigil, and it could be some sort of combination of them. But let me just look up Erdtree. Let's see. See if I can get kind of a picture of it. Oh God. You can kind of see it there, but maybe this is a little better. Well, let's just do this. All right, now let's pull up the sigils. Yeah, I mean, here, we'll just do that as well. Like, to me, it more closely resembles the Dragon Communion than the Flame of Frenzy. But it looks kind of like its own unique thing. Maybe some sort of combination of the two. But, I mean, obviously we know that dragon and serpents is a huge element of Mesmer. So I lean more towards Dragon Communion. But either way, this element of kind of frenzy and chaos I think will be a pretty big element of the game, and I don't think it'll be told the same way as like in the base game, right? In the Lands Between, it's like this very heretical, like terrible thing because it has already been split off. but in the Shadowland, it's gonna be all melded together. Like, if you ask me, the lion um, boss thing, like the dragon lion dancer thing, it's a very chaotic, frenzy like enemy. But it's not a bad heretical thing in that land because everything was blended together. So I think we'll see elements of it, but I don't think it's going to be like this terrible, um, like Flame of Frenzy Lord ending, very negative connotation to it. I think it's just going to be part of the world and part of kind of like the enemy structure, if that makes sense. And I also like there was a lot of people talking that this was a snake with two heads, but and this isn't super clear, but I don't think that those are heads. Like it seems to just go behind it and then come back down. I could be wrong, but it looks identical to the rest of its body, and I would think a head like those are clearly heads, right? Like you can see like its tongue and its eye, and like that to me is just one snake that is wrapped around a sword. But again, could be wrong. But obviously, it's fire and it's either dragon or frenzy flame or whatever. But it seems, and I've said this in my last one, that Mesmer seems to just be like this amalgamation of everything heretical to the lands between and to the Golden Order. So dragons and serpents and fire and death and the different outer gods and like all this different type of stuff he seems to be the vessel for all of those things, which makes sense, if he's kind of like the key enemy, and he would be the vessel, right, like for everything that has been locked away and sealed away. Okay, where was that? It's not. Oh, it's not Frenzy Flame. Very similar. Dragon Communion. Yep. Three Fingers appears as a multitude of places. The icon is present in the Dragon Cult insignia. Dragon skins. The trident motif is the major factor here, as appearing on the blue-white. The land is veiled. Yep. Yep. For sure. Yeah, I think it's veiled like um obviously, America's Veil in game kind of like hides you. And then her bedchamber and the just basically what a veil symbolizes in everyday life as far as like hiding away something. But I think that it's even kind of veiled the whole game behind this cloud. And again, we'll kind of work our way there, but that cloud and the structure of the divine towers and the water, like it all has a very, very, very significant meaning. The meaning, as far as I can discern, is the function of differentiation, taking ambiguous unconscious content and cutting it into ordered parts. The same job as the hero archetype, hence association to axes, swords. It's also why it's related to three heads on the dissect symbol, a clear great mother archetype that differentiates when slain by a hero. I very strongly think the tree we see in the shadow of the tree is the roots. Yep. Inverted. Yep. I agree with that. Looking through the game with your viewpoint does explain a lot. That is not what is meant by the self. Melina does not fit that. The Erdtree, the self associated with the color red and the arcane motif. It's quoted as saying, "Red hair in a dream is symbolic of the self." Yeah, Jung says a lot, dude. Um, the reason that I think Melina is the self is because she seems to encapsulate all the different parts of the psyche. I believe that her pink hair is the anima and animus together. I believe that her golden eye is the persona ego, and that she still has the shut eye of the gloam-eyed queen, because America still has yet to accept and integrate that into part of herself. And the final version of Melina won't be revealed until that happens. The Erdtree, like the Erdtree seal and cipher, just pure light, physically incapable of casting a shadow, so the title could be metaphorical or psychological. Yep. Look like Chad. Don't know what that means. Radigan fundamentally cannot be the self. I know. Man, Raze, you gotta chill out, dude. You have to chill out. Fair Missoula statue is an excellent example of the self. The self is keenly a quanternity. Jung calls the self Quantino and Aeon, and specifically use Horace's children as an example. 3 wolves, one human. Radigan fundamentally cannot be the self. Something more accurate to say America and Radigan as one represent the self. Self cannot be split. I know that. Are you saying that those 3 heads on the Mesmer sigil is? You can see it in the old depicts Placiducex. I'm more interested in the right sigil. All right, let's check it out. Assuming you're talking about that. I have no idea what that is. It could be like roots, symbolizing the crucible. Mesmer strongly fits the serpent aspect of the self, directly opposite America and Radigan. The self as Ouroboros to emphasize. Yep. I agree, I didn't think they were heads either. The path of the dragon communion is one of chaos. You lose your humanity if you go down that path. Yura tells you. So Yura is so closely associated with Jabiri and chaos and Eleonora. The head kind of blends with the spearhead. Jabiri is the closest fit for the collective shadow personified, and likewise represents the nadir of the id, directly opposed to the apex of humanity. My eyes, Mesmer is the embodiment of all things deemed heretical. Yep. In the eye of the 2 fingers. Moreover, holy crap. Regarding Mesmer as impaler, we see the impale motif in a lot of places too. It's shown as a factor that breaks seals, locks and opens. Divine towers hold the filament of the veil up. Makes me wonder more about their part of the story. It also represents the. Wouldn't be surprised if the Shadowlands are upside down, inverted carrying study hall. Yeah. We even saw the guy trailer. Of course, Stranger Things comes to mind. Yeah. Yeah. The argument for Melina with all those combined aspects is fair. She strongly fits the idea of the player's anima, as do all the maidens. Yeah, I agree with that. Which would connect her to America still. Yep. No, I actually meant the 3 heads from the Dragon Communion seal are the heads of plastic. Oh, okay. What 3 heads? Oh, like these? Oh, that would make sense to me. Also, sorry, we're mixing two topics that relate to number three. Just not a lot of characters to be less. Yeah, I mean, Rays, I think you just like you're trying to tell like at a very granular level, which is great, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but the, this is not the medium to do that in. Let's just say that. I don't know if it's obvious, but Melena's mouth is so similar to Marika's from what we see in her face when she breaks the ring, like the somewhat forward lower lip. You know what I mean? I don't, but I mean on this channel, I think that they are all aspects of Marika, and her. She's kind of gone through this psychological dismemberment, and which is kind of what happens when you are you're dealing with trauma and something significant happens in your life. It kind of shatters you, and you are going along picking up the pieces, like or Osiris's body, putting it back together. Okay, so I think with the understanding that the map is a fetus in a womb, and the alchemical importance of or how alchemists relate certain things to the womb, and the fact that the Shadowlands is being obscured the whole time. It's been right in front of us. The and all the other different elements, right? And the fact that this place that we're entering into seems to be the the crucible, like it's where everything started. It's where Miyazaki says Marika stepped foot in. It's where she became a god. Everything, and the trailer, I mean, is full of elements of the crucible. I am almost leaning more into that these are Marika's parents, and the child inside of this belly is Marika herself, and we are kind of witnessing the origins of Marika, what her consciousness was like at the very beginning, how through development, right? And that's for all of us, from when we are an infant to a toddler to a child to young adulthood, how we separate and literally like splinter ourselves off, and we kind of we pick a path that is going to get us most in the light of what we want to be and how we want to be accepted, is kind of what I think we're seeing here. Could be wrong, but that seems to fit the narrative for the base game, as well as what we saw in the trailer as far as this representing the Crucible. And if you think about kind of the fetal development stages, like it starts just as this clump of atoms, and it slowly grows and develops and becomes more and more human-like, and it develops a fetal brain and the nervous system and then the heart and like all these different types of things. Like, it starts as just a clump of everything, and from this one thing everything comes from it. We've talked about it before, but it's very similar to like the Big Bang. Like, the Big Bang started as just the size of an apple or whatever, and everything came from there, and inside of there was just this clump of super hot, super dense particles, and from that little tiny thing, everything that we see in the universe today came from that. And that's no different than what happens kind of in a womb when a baby is being developed. So kind of, Miyazaki says that one pillar of the DLC is the history of the Shadowland and the history of Queen Marika. In fact, Shadowlands is where Marika became a god and where the Erdtree was born. Of course, there is a culture before the Erdtree, and that lion dance comes from this culture. And we know this culture, probably, to be kind of the culture of the Crucible, where there was no divisions and fractures, where everything was united. There wasn't kind of this hatred towards thing and repression and acceptance of things. Like everything was just all blended together. And then Shadowlands takes place, are sundered from the lands between, where the main story takes place, is removed from and hidden from the outside world, and this veil is the symbol of that. Okay. So now I am going to take kind of a dive into what the psychological shadow means, and how it fits into the story being told in both the base game as well as this DLC. So a few quotes. Shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is the essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge, and it therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. Indeed, self-knowledge as a psychotherapeutic measure frequently requires much painstaking work extended over a long period of time. So there's a couple things in there that I think are relevant. So first of all, it's that the shadow is a problem for the ego personality, and it's a problem for every single person. And Marika, whether she's a legit god or this is just a human psychological story, it happens to every single person, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of kind of dark, very still moments to work through your shadow, and it's met with considerable resistance. And I believe that resistance that we've talked about before is the character Radon, and he kind of symbolizes this resistance to anything other than this current status quo. And the fact that it takes a long time for this to happen, and the base game, the kind of intro is that Queen Marika has been missing for a very long time, and she's just been in this in the tree. And I almost take it that she is like, if this is her bed veil, that we see in her bedroom, that she is almost like she's dealing with this, like laying in her bed. Like we talked about this last time, but like you can almost picture her laying in bed. Her mental consciousness is going down under into her unconscious and is doing what is called shadow work, and confronting these parts of herself. The shadow self can be described as highly emotional, driven by primal instinct, often violent, and usually concealed from the social world by the conscious mind. Jung also believed that the qualities in our shadow was determined by the things we criticize the most in others. It is, so to speak, the dark mind, everything we separate from the rest of ourselves. That is very apparent with what we see in the Shadowlands. But it's becoming increasingly recognized that humans ought to seek stability with their shadow selves and seek reconciliation. The harder one fights against the nature of their shadow, and the deeper they hide it, the more unstable their relationship is with the part of themselves they refuse to accept. Likewise, if one allows their shadow to control them and their actions, they leave their mind open to being overwhelmed by their shadow and can become a danger to others and themselves. So I think that the first part of this is basically what leads up to the Night of the Black Knives. That she has locked away and sealed away her shadow self, that she is keeping it hidden, and it has become so unstable and has grown so much that she can no longer like control it, and it seeps into her life and takes control over basically the not the entirety of her psyche, but it kind of rears its head and says that it's still here. And I believe that the Frenzy Flame ending is kind of the second part, where to me the Frenzy Flame ending is you are burning away everything that is in the lands between, like the everything that is touched by gold, everything that is the ego consciousness, and all that's left is the shadow. And we see that because what comes when at the end of that is the Glomide Queen. So that's all that is left is the shadow, and the unconscious and the chaos of it, and it can become very dangerous to others and to themselves. And I think that's why Melina is so resistant to having that happen. She begs and pleads that this can be fixed, like there's still a way through this. And we kind of know now that through this DLC, that seems to be what we're doing, is we are actually going to fix and heal this part of America. The key to stability with the darker nature is not to give into the shadow, but to embrace it. And how it helps to define one as a person and find a balanced way to express it in one's daily life. Interacting with it and overcoming the shadow in this way is often best done by self-reflection, meditating, dreaming, daydreaming, with the goal of self-discovery, and the process is commonly referred to as shadow work. So there's a lot in that paragraph right there, but in my DLC prediction, I said that we're following the path to the self. We are kind of literally rediscovering the different elements that make up America as a complete person, and that is called the Golden Road. And I think it's just in Reddit. I don't think it's like officially called the Golden Road, but it's got 4 equally spaced circles interlocking, and the process of individuation has 4 steps where you integrate the anima animus, the persona ego, the shadow, and then finally the self. And those 4 processes seem to literally be what we're doing during our base game, but we never actually get to the self because it's still being hidden away. And this is why I believe Melina still has her one eye closed, but all the other elements seem to be integrated within her, and all this different type of stuff. And at the end of the DLC trailer, hopefully this works for you guys today, we see Miquella here. And again, Miquella to me is the 4th stage of the Animus. He is the Greek god Hermes, which we will talk about, and kind of the implications of that. He is a healer. He is the one who is able to go between worlds, and he can help us. He's kind of the intermediary between the shadow and the ego. And I think what we're seeing here is I don't think that he's just going to heal this tree completely and make it the Erdtree. I think what we're going to see is a new tree of kind of this. It's going to be a different color, maybe gray, kind of like how we see here. But it's going to have elements of both the Erdtree and the shadow tree, and that is going to be kind of perhaps Miquella's domain from now on. Knowing that the Haligtree, right, is not really viable anymore, it's possible that he just stays down here, and this is kind of his place from now on. Because we know that Miyazaki said that we're not going to get a new ending, like for the credits ending, but we're going to get some sort of closure as to exactly what the DLC means and what happens there. So, to me, if shadow work and kind of the acceptance is about, you're not just, accepting it and then putting it back away, like you're integrating it into your daily life. So you're making it part of your everyday consciousness. This new tree, which is two trees coming together and kind of strangling each other, are now going to become this kind of symbiotic, very harmonious, unified tree. Is how I take that. Um, let's see here. Let's see here. Agreed on this format. Not working for me, dumping lore. I think it's worth looking at the blue-white wooden shield regarding the topic of symbols. All right, we'll do that. Interesting to see if you reach some conclusions. I'm very much down with Ray's. I often get specific and think it's valid, but yeah, it's the best we can do here and clarify the big picture and the basics. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, I would have to set out like literally like a 12-hour session to talk about maybe like 10% of the game, which, dude, I'm more than down to do. I think if we're looking at the undifferentiated shadow, then the two biggest archetypes are the Great Mother and the Spirit, Wise Old Man. That would be my best guess so far. As to what, though? Why we use the Great Mother symbol is because it represents the relationships and differentiation. You're exactly right. It's about the fetus and the mother being one entity and differentiating into two people. Yep. Unconscious contents are made static through repression. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of the Knight of Black Knives, check out the Concealing Veil Talisman. Their cloth, the cloth that was cut. Oh, from the Queen's bedchamber. Oh, that's pretty cool. Let me pull that up. Concealing Veil. I mean, that would make perfect sense knowing now that, like, yeah. I think you're right, dude. That's an awesome catch. That's a really cool catch. Huh. I love how it has absolutely no use in the real game. Like, the assassins can just completely whip your ass, but you have to be crouching and walking away from from somebody for it to work. Completely useless. But yeah, the lore implications of that tiny little thing are huge, right? Like, that basically confirms that the assassins come from the Shadowland, right? That they are, and we already knew this, like, basically the shadows of America, and they are taking control and making themselves known because of the constant repression that they've faced. Um, we likewise see Radigan Seal used to confine. Yeah. When unconscious contents are repressed too excessively, then you have reduced access to psychic energy and antiadromia. Yep. Kicking off. That's. I was literally. And I have another board where I'm making. I'm going to try and talk about everything, which is, Raise, you should join me for that one, because that's going to be like a super deep dive into all things step psychology, and antiodromia is a big part of it. Yep, and actually we're going to talk about that. But Raise, I'd be interested to know if the way that I take the children of, or the demigods and the great runes, is that they are complexes and splinter psyches, as Yoon calls them, fully autonomous, and they seem to follow that law of enantiodromia, where when a positive aspect is born, a negative one is born along with it to keep it in balance. There's no golden sap in this shot. This shot? Not that shot. What shot are you talking about? One thing I've noticed in this tree is that the sap that is leaking is gone. All right, I think I'm... Which one are you guys talking about here? Yeah, is Mandela or specifically the self? Yep. Yep. Totally agree with you there, Raze. Yeah, I take kind of everything that's like a sigil or the great runes seem to be Mandela's. I think it's interesting that it's Melina who is helping you through this. Again, another reason why I think that she is the self, because she is literally like walking this path with us. Nicola's fundamental problem with the Hallock tree is that the roots do not work. The roots are shadow symbolism. Arbonetics are frail due to the lack of shadow, hence the need for wolves. Interesting. Heavenward roots, likely used to support Nicola. Why allude to what he's doing as terrifying? Resistance to the healing process? So I talked about this kind of in my my first kind of reaction, but it depends on who the person is talking, right? Like that. If all you knew was the Shadowlands, and then you heard that somebody was going to come and like change it, I could see that being like if you were an aspect of the shadow and somebody is coming to heal and love and change it, because it's all you know, it could be very terrifying. That's kind of the only thing that I can think of. It could be just talking about the sheer power that he has. That even though that it's like, you know, it's out of love and it's for good. Like the fact that somebody can do that is terrifying. Could be resistance to the healing process. Absolutely, yeah. I think it totally depends on the context and who is speaking. Even has America's mischief detail on the top. Oh, nice catch, dude. Yeah, that's a great one. Yep. The assassins are closely tied to America. America first set foot in the Shadowland. It's safe to assume the assassins come from here too. Yep, 100%. Yep. But to be fair, everything comes from here. That was another thing that like, kind of drove me crazy when I was watching other streams. Is that like people really got hung up on like, oh, there's Celia, and I wonder if this is where this person comes from. Like, I think it's if this is the Crucible, and the Crucible is where everything comes from. It's like we're gonna see bits and pieces of every single culture and every single like thing that we've seen above the surface. Everything starts from here. Let me see. So does anyone think Mariko was involved in the assassination? Absolutely. Yep. Totally agree. Uh, Again, like kind of like what we've talked about. It the more you repress your shadow side, it's gonna come back and bite you in the ass. It's still you, right? Like you're kind of it's like self sabotage. And that's not probably like the exact way to say it, but it's still you, and you're still the one doing this to yourself. And kind of like what Ray's was talking about, like this attack on the ego from the shadow is kind of the very beginnings of the individuation process. It's the ego kind of needs to descend and get purified in the unconscious in order for the healing process to start really. So she did it whether she knew it or not, and it started this healing process for her. and it's also, we don't really know when she went down there, because I think there's a dialogue Miyazaki says that she went in there and then Mikola followed her and we're following in Mikola's footsteps. So it's possible that she went down there and then like saw saw her faults and realized that something needed to be done and started this whole process, which would have started with the Night of the Black Knives. Terror and fear are specifically how the conscious ego responds to unconscious content. Yep. Seems that knives in America are the same people brought by ships from environmental clues and item descriptions. Spawn of the Dark Moon, Fell Flame, final cutscene with Mikola. Can I ask you why you think she did it? And was she aware of all aspects? And also, was it conscious decision? 100% same page regarding, okay, demigods inheriting ruins and the ruin archetypal content, the children, vehicles from the complex. Yep. Okay. Nicholas planned to take over or find a new lord. America being involved in the Night of Black Knives is supposed to be a big reveal, but we didn't have enough info as to why America would do it. The function responsible for making archetypes into symbols is the anima. That's why it is the feminine are as associating giving life to the soul content. The assassins are Newmans, which are the same race as America. So do I come from the same land? Was it a late term abortion? Yeah, I kind of think it's along those lines. And there's a few things that make it make me say that this was all caused by this death of a unborn child. And that's, obviously, if you look here, it's like, it's unbelievably, the Lake of Rot sits in the womb. She's stabbed in the womb. The womb of the Iron Virgins is just full of snakes. Harpies talk about this, like all this different type of stuff. But I think what's even more interesting is that there are... Where is it? Here we go. So, a lot of people have been talking about the Weeping Peninsula and Castle Morn now that the DLC is... the trailer's up and we're getting a little bit more context of things. But I think it's really important that if we are in America's psyche, and the map is America, and there is an area called the Weeping Peninsula where it is constantly raining, and there is a castle called Morn, and the final kind of site of grace is the Morn Moan grave, and it has the gravestone that we see also in the DLC. I think it's fair to assume that this bridge of sacrifice to get us into the Weeping Peninsula, the fact that it's next to the sacrifice of the Impaler's catacombs, my guess, based off of this kind of these clues, is that America had some sort of complication in her pregnancy and she was going to die, and she had to sacrifice her child and basically get, like you were saying, a late term abortion in order to survive. And this, I think, set in motion everything that we see in game. there's the fact that Irina is here and she gets murdered, and we see what happens to Oscar in Castle Morn. The harpies are very prevalent here, talking about, you know, losing a child, not being able to give birth. Like, there's so many different things within the Weeping Peninsula that would really steer you towards some sort of stillbirth, late term abortion. But the fact that it says sacrifice seems to me that America had to make the decision to basically get rid of this child. That's how I take it. But again, you know, the Impaler Catacombs being right next to it, the fact that I believe the reason that Mesmer was, you never hear about him, and the reason that he's like born of the Shadowlands and occupies this space is because he was never actually born. Like, he kind of, his consciousness, if you will, or her memory, America's memory of this event, sits in this Shadowlands at all times. Why images of boats and people arriving in the Shadowland? I actually have a theory on that we'll get to here, Mike. Which assassins were scions of the Eternal City, and we later find out that the denizens of the Eternal City, not the Nox, are in reality the Newmans. Jung says that when too much shadow content is repressed, the anima can identify with the self, prematurely ending the individuation process. Once this happens, the animus presents the balance to the anima. That is what happened in Elden Ring, as far as I can tell. Godwin was supposed to be the martyr of destined death. I don't think so. Used both for Godwin and the assassins. Anything regarding the sea from the sea is using the sea as a symbol for the unconscious. Yep. Just interpret as America came from the unconscious shadow, which, yeah, I've said that before, as far as like anything like where they cross the fog, they cross the sea, ships, boats, any sort of element of water is directly tied to the unconscious, shadowy realm. Godwin parallels the hero death of Siegfried in Jung's Red Book incredibly well. Read the chapter if you get a chance. It's very much Godwin's story, in my opinion. Oh, that's interesting. I like to think that with the amount of concealment spells and incantations in Celia, they could be scions mentioned. Yeah. Tarnish Archaeologist has done some good work on the aspect of lore interpretation for sure. As to why Celia is still intact, Radagon got involved, or Radon got involved. Thanks, Douglas. So is either a sign of the Golden Bough or a sign of the Eternal City. Both couldn't make it at the same time. Like, how would you prune excess tree branches to nourish the ones you want to grow? Worth noting that the Golden Bough is one of the main non-Jung books listed in depth psychology area. Not read it yet, though. Also, the main side quest there is essentially about tragedy of losing a child. Yep. Pruning tree branches is differentiation. Again, a branch is just part of the tree until you cut it off. Then its own tree, same as childbirth, you move from the symbolism over percent. Okay. So, in my Elden Lord video kind of breakdown, where I talk about the different stages of animus development, and how that seems to correlate with the different Elden Lords, and the fact that Radagon's seal and Marika's seal, one is very feminine and kind of like the more spiritual side of things. One is much more masculine in the physical side of things. It seems, and the animus is kind of like our animating component. It's our logos, it's our order. It kind of gives structure to everything, and it's the Elden Lords that kind of rule, right? Like Marika is the god, but the Elden Lords seem to have kind of like control and domain over what is being done in the lands between. And I hypothesized that the final version of this would be Miquella, and a description of. Let's see if I can find it. So in the final stage, the fourth stage of the Animus is the incarnation of spiritual meaning. A Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, or Dalai Lama. On this highest level, like the Anima as Sophia, the Animus mediates between a woman's conscious mind and the unconscious. In mythology, he appears as Hermes, messenger of the gods. In dreams, he is a helpful guide. Now that seems to be exactly what Miquella is doing here. Miquella seems to be able to. You need Miquella to be able to enter this unconscious, this shadow realm. He seems, and outside of that, all of the Erdtree symbols and things along that line are very reminiscent of like the caduceus, and which is the symbol of Hermes, and unity and things like that. And the fact that we need Miquella to basically be the mediary between these two realms, right? The lands between and the shadow lands. The fact that he is going there more or less with Marika, he seems to fit this final stage that we predicted in our Elden Lord video. Now, Hermes has a ton of different implications to it, from alchemy and from his kind of doings as a god and his mythos and all this different type of stuff. But what's really interesting is that in alchemy, Hermes is also known as Mercury, because Mercury, it is kind of like this medium, this substance that isn't solid, and it isn't like watery either. It's kind of like this in between. It is able to combine things like gold and silver, and the importance of that and what we're doing in the Shadowlands is basically that. Like, we seem to be following Marika and Miquella. Miquella seems to be there to be this intermediary who heals the consciousness and unconsciousness, and it's only him that can do this. He is our spiritual guide. Like, all these different types of things like just line up so well with what he is doing. So therefore in alchemy, Mercury was believed to shift between life and death. Mercury is also represented by a serpent or a snake, and his symbol is said to resemble a cosmic womb. So there again we have Mercury, the womb, this intermediary between life and death, between consciousness and unconsciousness, a helpful guide and dreams, all this different type of stuff. The Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury. The alchemical tradition talks about Mercury and used Latin to hide many of the secrets of alchemy, but really the word Mercury comes from the Greek Hermes. So we need to study the Greek. In the Greek tradition, Hermes is the messenger of the gods, the one who conveys all the knowledge and wisdom of the gods to the other gods and to humankind and even into hell. More talking about Hermes here and Mercury. He's able to move quickly and freely between the worlds of mortal and divine by his winged sandals. Hermes plays the role of the soul guide. His main symbol is the caduceus, a winged staff intertwined with two snakes, copulating in carvings of the other gods, messenger of the gods, and the mediator between the realm of the dead and the kingdom of the living. Again, like, everything that you read about Hermes and about Mercury, it's this either this entity or the substance that is able to combine and transport things from and relay information between two very different things, and then can also combine these two very different things into one, like unalloyed gold. Um, and then here is just Miyazaki. So this land of shadow itself is a place the player will visit and walk in the footsteps of Mikola. Mikola is a key part of the story this time, perhaps as guessed by many players who saw the art. That was in fact Mikola. We're going to be following his footsteps, trying to see what he's doing there. Another axis of the story is Queen Marika and what she did in the Land of Shadow and what led Mikola to follow her there. So, again, we have all of this information that's telling us that Marika needs to go into the shadow world and heal and accept and nourish this part of herself. But she can't do it alone. She needs this intermediary between the life and death, between this ego and shadow. She needs Mikola in order to do this. And then obviously we're following Mika there because we're the player character, and that's just what a video game is. I'm actually going to jump back a little bit back to kind of what Marika originally did there, and then what she's doing back there. So a lot of the DLC trailer, it talks about this war that happened, and that there didn't, like, the way that I understand the dialogue when they say they weren't saints, they were just on the other side of the war, like on the losing side of the war, to me is very much like there wasn't good or bad people, like there was just a winner and loser. And basically what that, to me, is the war was about things that Marika accepted and that she was bringing with her, basically, along her godhood journey, and the things that were going to be relegated and stay in the Shadowlands. That to me, and she locked away, this is again when she locked away Destined Death, when she defeated the Gloam-Eyed Queen, like all these different types of things. I believe that was the war that took place, and she's just going back there now after this tragedy has happened and her life is in shambles. She's going back there to confront kind of her demons and to work through her shit. The shadow goes by many familiar names: the disowned self, the lower self, the dark twin or brother, in Bible and myth, the double, repressed self, alter ego, id. When we come face to face with our darker side, we use metaphors to describe these shadow encounters: meeting our demons, wrestling with the devil, descent into the underworld, dark night of the soul, midlife crisis. So there's another aspect of Newman's that I think is relevant, that should be talked about. And it seems that, like, if you guys have noticed, when you are creating a character, if you go to the Newman race, it automatically puts you in an aged. That's like you're old no matter what you do. I mean, you can go and redo it, but the base model for a Newman is an old person. And Jung talks about these stages of life, and this individuation process happens in the second stage of life, usually around like 45, 50. And one of my commenters suggested that it could be that Marika is just no longer able to have children, right? Like she is going through menopause and she can't have children. And this is a huge blow to her because of kind of her identity of life giver and, the great mother and all this different type of stuff. And if she can no longer do that, what that would do to her psyche, in a quote unquote midlife crisis, could also be what caused her to shatter her psyche and to start this process of individuation. So this might be something that we never really know about and that never gets answered. I think the fact that Mesmer is here and is a child of Marika points us more in the direction that she lost this child, especially with the statue behind Mesmer It's America holding an infant. Um, that to me is what seems to be the story. But the fact that Newman is automatically aged is really interesting to me, especially if if America is kind of, she hangs her hat and has all this pride in being able to have children, and she no longer can because of just her age. It has an interesting aspect to it. Um, when our shadow remains unconscious, it wreaks havoc on our life. Repressed content do not merely disappear, but rather they function independently of our conscious awareness. In other words, the shadow has the capacity to override our conscious ego and take possession of our being, exerting control over our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. When this happens, we become unconsciously driven into hard times, all the while remaining ignorant that these troubled periods were self-imposed and not the product of bad luck or fate. So there again, you have kind of like the reason that the Night of the Black Knives happened is because she was not willing to accept this part of herself, and it starts wreaking havoc in her life, and it takes control over her ego. And I make the argument that the ego was personified in Godwin, and that he descends, right? He quote unquote dies, descends into the unconscious, and turns into like a fish type of character. And again, water as being kind of the symbol of the unconscious, it seems that he is in the unconscious and getting pure. And water, from a alchemical standpoint, is purifying, right? Like it washes away our sins and all the things that we are unpure about ourselves, kind of the biblical flood, all this different type of stuff. It's the same with psychological alchemy. So Godwin as being the golden child and sitting in the capital and doing no wrong, and being kind of the apex and pinnacle of the golden order and everything that America wishes to be. The fact that he is the one being targeted, right, and it's him that descends into kind of these hellish depths, makes perfect sense from a psychological standpoint. And again, because it's these assassins that have ties to America, or to America, it's like this is saying it's self-imposed. It's not bad luck. It's not somebody else's fault. Like, this is self-imposed because she has repressed this Shadowland for so long that these aspects are basically wreaking havoc and taking control. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and has not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. That's, every single, this game is very much about duality and union of opposites and unity and yin and yang and all this different type of stuff. So I'll check some comments here. Okay. Mikola's pretty complicated. The nascent motif applies, which means potential, basically. He's one of the butterflies. He's associated with wheat that cannot be harvested, hence no abundance. 4 Empyreans, 4 seasons, 4 sections of the sky, portending fate. Blue-white shield, as mentioned by Rays. Mikola is spring, Milena fall, summer, Ronnie winter. There has to be 4 butterflies. I love that. That's cool. Hermes Mercurius spirit is super dense topic. You are for sure right that Mikola falls within that broad category, but I think we need to differentiate it deeper. It is also worth noting that Hermes, as the 4th aspect of the animus, is representative of the total animus, just as Sophia is akin to the total. Yeah. And I in that video, Riz, you should watch it. It's like, I don't say like they're different people. They take aspects of their former Like it's a cumulative thing. One thing I've noticed is land of shadow is riddled with smaller versions of the tree that is strangled of the tree that is strangling the Erdtree. Oh, interesting. I didn't notice that. What's the deal with the rune of unborn then? Um, I'm gonna need some more on that, Hamlet. Four specifically means totality. Young explains. Yep. Things between feasibly does as a whole. As far as I can tell, the rune of unborn is Miquella's, and I have a bunch of reasons why, but the DLC trailer's rune being named Ring of Miquella complicates things. Yeah. Of course, it could be Melina related. Unborn as it functions alongside Renala is very much how Jung interpreted the Oedipus complex, which is also Box quest line. It's returned to the mother to be undifferentiated. I think that's like the whole story in Born Anew. I think that's literally the whole story. We likewise have lots of evidence of Miquella cocooning when he reaches adulthood and becoming someone new. Yeah, I mean, like Melania becomes somebody new. The Axiom of Maria, where she blooms 3 times, and the third time she becomes like a true goddess. Yeah, there. Like I think the whole story is about like growing, becoming born anew. Could the rune of unborn be related to Mesmer? It's possible. Definitely possible. I mean, especially if Radigan comes from the same place, um, and he gifts it to Renala. Yeah, that's possible. Especially since he was literally the unborn. Okay, so continuing kind of this topic on Hermes, Mercury, and alchemy, and the union of opposites and things like that. Talk just a little bit more about Hermes and Mercury, and before we go into it, but all of us here who are suffering in the lower worlds need help of Hermes Mercury's if we are to get out. Of course, in this tradition, we always study these symbols for what they are, symbols, myths that hide a truth. The symbol of Mercury hides something in ourselves. The dead warrior in the vase, he's talking about this vase up here, does not represent a literal dead warrior. It represents a warrior of consciousness. It represents someone who is dying mystically, psychologically, someone who is sacrificing himself and destroying and removing all that is impure in the animal in order to be reborn something new. Mercury, Hermes, is the one who facilitates the process of thorough change. So that paragraph to me is you could use that paragraph to describe what is happening in Elden Ring. To me. To me, America, right, is sacrificing herself, her old self. It looks very much like she is dead, like she's not present. But like this is saying, it's not a the dead warrior does not represent a literal dead warrior. It represents a warrior of consciousness. Represents someone who is dying mystically, psychologically, someone who is sacrificing himself. And if we look at kind of the crucifixion in America, and we tie that to, obviously Christianity and, the whole sacrificing and things like that to be born anew, this is literally what's happening, in my opinion. And the reason that, America needs Miquella so bad is because it is Mercury Hermes who facilitates this process. And without him, she is kind of stuck in this never ending limbo of kind of like this trauma of her past. And she needs Mercury, she needs Hermes, she needs Mikola in order to go about through this change. Um, Again, we're not just describing a so-called supposed god from ancient times that no one believes is real. Hermes Mercury represents an aspect of ourselves, an aspect of being, of divinity, of living, vibrating, actual force in nature that the alchemist learns to work with. Hermes Mercury is inside all of us. Um, in alchemy traditions, Hermes or Mercurius is seen as an emblem of transformation, embodying both the material and spiritual changes that the alchemist sought. Jung interpreted these alchemical transformations as metaphors for psychological changes, with Hermes standing as a symbol of transformation. So, again, Mikola as Hermes, as this final stage of the animus, as the symbol of transformation, of the symbol of healing, as being the mediator for this entire process, and the fact that we enter his cocoon, and he is there along the side of America the whole time. It fits incredibly well. So the Divine Towers have stumped people for a while, and I think that there is an explanation to them. So first of all, we have the 6 Divine Towers, and if we look at the runes, right, that they occupy, they are opposites of one another, or like different sides to the same coin. So across from one another, we have Radon and we have Rykard. And their runes are the same but different. And they are opposites of one another, right? Radon is all about blasphemy, taking down the Erdtree. Or Rykard, sorry, is all about blasphemy, taking down the Erdtree, while Radon is about being completely loyal and like almost to a fault, and resistance to change and keeping things the way they are. And then you have the Rune of the Unborn and Ronnie at this tower. And then you have Melania, the Rune of Rot, the basically dying. They are the same but different. They share the same elements, the same basic structure, but they are completely antithesis to one another. And then again, finally, you have Godric's Great Rune, which I believe was originally Godwin's, the Anchor Rune, who is all about like this golden grace and kind of anchoring everything together, and lives above everything else, and is in the originally in the capital, you know, alongside the Erdtree. And then you have Moog and Morgott, who are relegated to the sewers and outcast and hidden. They are opposites of one another. And where these opposites meet is is called the Mercurial Bath, and that is, in alchemy, a simplified version is it's called the Mother's Womb. It's where these union of opposites first originated, and then it's where they come back to basically reunite. And again, my guess is that this is where the Shadowlands will take place, and it is literally right underneath the Erdtree. So this comes from the Rosarium Philosophorum, which is a alchemical text with illustrations that illustrate the different steps of making the Philosopher's Stone, basically. And they, like everything they did, they made it very occult and hidden and meaning and very hard to understand. But luckily, we have people who are much smarter than me that can understand this. And what this is a 6-sided hexagon with a man and a woman that represent opposites being guided by a dove, which is like the soul, which is Mercury. And they descend into this mercurial bath, which is the mother's womb. And it's where they came from, and it's where they're going back to reunite and to become ultimately the final form of the rebus here. So the mercurial fountain is the mother's womb. It's the earliest stages of development prior to ego birth. It's where everything comes from and is united. This is the foundation of human psyche, cosmic, inorganic, and reptilian. So, and just to read, so I'm reading this book here, Mysterium of the Cumultio. It talks about these pictures and puts them into terms that my tiny little brain can understand. But basically, what it means is descent into Bath is a solutio and an image of a descent into the unconscious that has the effect of dissolving the solid ordered structure of the ego. Water was thought of as the womb, and to enter the water, the solutio was the return to the womb for rebirth. So again, we have this element of opposites coming together in this bath, which is associated with the mother's womb, which is associated with the crucible where everything was, which is associated with where these opposites came from. So these opposites emerge from here, and then at some point down the road, they come back to here to reunite, and for a new whole person to be born again. And again, this is why I feel like they are showing this in the DLC, this picture of a pregnant woman. It seems like we are going back into this womb, back into the place where everything began. It's a symbolic descent back into the unconscious, where everything started. And in psychological terms, it is, the ego and the shadow. In alchemical terms, it's gold and silver. And then it's guided by Mercury, whether it's Hermes or whether it's Mercury as the alchemical, it is the facilitator between these things. What's really interesting is that there are two sets of the rebus, which I think we see in both the game. The first version of the rebus is based off of the moon. You can see that the rebus here is standing on the moon. It's the moon tree, and it's not the final version. It's not the perfected version of the rebus. It still has to do basically this entire process again. And I believe that this is what we see in game, especially with the, how Renala is the queen of the full moon, and she marries Radagon, and we see after that, we see America and Radagon become one, but it seems to be kind of under the guise of the moon. But in this one, once you do it again, it is now the sun, and it is the perfected version of the rebus. Basically, once the ego has been cleansed and purified and all this different type of stuff, and comes back from this descent into the unconscious, the final true rebus is born. And again, dragon wings and snakes and all this different type of stuff is very prevalent, and it's possible with the kind of the way Mikola is presented to us as being this very white hermaphroditic kind of person, and if he represents everything good, right, and the ego and America and kind of the healing quality. And then we have this new character, Mesmer, who represents the exact opposite of that. It's possible that these two represent the final rebus, and that these two together will basically start an entire new way of living with the kind of golden healing properties of Mikola and the opposite of that with Mesmer. That's just a guess, though. So, yeah, I'd be curious to know what. I think Mesmer is the part of the self, which means that the Mesmer can be differentiated into demigods too. So, like another parent, which sounds a bit out there, but effectively the Erdtree is the parent of the demigods too, just different faces of their parents. It's maybe worth pointing out that Mesmer is extremely Mercury themed. Yep, he is definitely very Mercury themed. I mean, he's covered in winged snakes. Would be surprised if Mesmer and Mikola are fully distinct, different characters. Yeah, I agree. I think it's worth noting that you can visually see the siblings, especially twins, uh, have visually similar runes. Yeah. Yep. Godwin's the anchor rune. Then you need to remove him if you want set sail into the sea, I suppose. Yeah, exactly. The ego has a lot of different properties, but one of the properties is it is a thing that holds together your complexes. So, and Blaze Rays, I know it's a simplified version of it. Back off, dude. Um, Without that, everything else gets kind of scattered. So once the ego is removed, the and descends into the unconscious. Yeah, exactly. That's where change can be made. Yep. The Vine Towers are a very repeated motif in Elden Ring, or of archetypes being split and returned. Um, let's also remember the resplendence of Order of Rot, which is that of death and rebirth, as Gowry says. The fountain is essentially the albedo related. It's about differentiating further than just matter into a level that concerns soul, spirit, and matter. Jungian terms, it is interaction with the anima archetype as the function that communicates archetypes, which are effectively divine. Overall, individuation is about taking an imperfect totality, refers to your mind, taking it apart and reassembling it carefully into a better, yeah. Um, the rot acts like that. It breaks everything down and then rebuilds something out. Yep, out of those parts. And Radon is the one who is seemingly able to resist that rot, and you have to kill him before you can enter into the DLC. Kind of like you guys are saying, like you have to break things down before you can build them back up, and Radon is stopping that from happening. You're good, man. All good. Um. So yeah, this is this is how I am um, basically interpreting the DLC uh, trailer. And obviously, oh, there is actually one other thing I wanted to talk about as far as ships. So obviously we have um, this obelisk in throughout the Eternal Cities, and it shows ships right coming from the sea and landing somewhere. Um, and one thing with the theme of, and we've talked about, this is just psychologically symbolic of you are leaving the shadow world and you are coming into basically your ego consciousness. Um, what I would like to add to this little bit, because we know that this occurs right in kind of your very early childhood, is I found a strange kind of connection between that and uh, very ancient old um, European cradles, um, especially with the themes of child death and all this different type of stuff. I I don't want to just automatically assume that these are ships, especially with like what is going on down here. Um, like something happens. They kind of separate and go away from one another, and then there are clear divisions between people. So it could be that it's ships, and they're just, this is civilization and blah 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 blah. But it's also important to see that. So back here is another ship, I would presume. This is another quote unquote ship, but it's surrounded by gravestones, and also the thumbprint gravestones in this field. And one, these are stone. So if these are ships, that's a ship I'm not getting on. You're not going to make it very far. And with the themes surrounding child loss, it's something that I think needs a little bit more interpretation than just that that's a ship. This is how like Newman's got here. There's not enough to go off of, but again, kind of the contextual clues and the way certain things kind of line up. It's hard, next to impossible to say, but it's just something that I wanted to throw out there and see your guys' opinions. That's kind of a very, out of everything crazy that I present, that was one that I don't know. It was a little more out there than, yeah. Between, always wondered if those illustrations told a story. There's a bunch of seeking holes in the map too. Portals to the Shadow Realm. Yeah. Burns to resist the rot. Yeah, let's see. So like all of these ships look very like wooden, canoe-y. Let's see. That's a bigger one. It's like a caravel. But again, wooden. I don't know if they're telling a story or not. It's, I don't know. To me, I think probably what happened is that they looked at this map and they thought it needed some more like elements to it. It'd be hard to say that they are telling a story, but that doesn't mean they're not. I mean, that's for sure. Yeah. So yeah, that petrified wood is such a still. Oh, that's a good point. Wearing Radagun has symbols of ceiling locking to render a flow of psychic content. Halted means repression granted, but also fits the petrified. Also fits the theme of stagnant water. Interesting. Yeah, it's a really good point. Fits the theme of flowing life that stunts in childhood. Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think for today, I mean, that was like a lot, right? Like we didn't even look at the trailer. Um, but I feel like the elements being that are being missed in kind of the mainstream lore videos, um, are like they're just not ever like they're not ever talked about, and it to me they're the story being told is like right in front of us, and I think that somebody needs to talk about it. And although it sounds crazy, I mean, you're talking about Miyazaki, and like if you look at Bloodborne as an example, the the psychological elements of that um, are on par with Elden Ring. They go down a different route, but and ultimately it's kind of like the same story, like child loss and the nightmare that is caused by that and healing that and blah 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 blah. So um, the Shadow Realm is also kind of like the other world from Silent Hill, uh, and trauma. Yeah. Oh, dude, I could talk about this for another 30 hours. What I'm working on right now is a video like this. I'm just gonna live stream it because making a video like that is gonna be insane. Where I'm applying this kind of depth psychology to the entire game. Um, what we covered here was just a, a brief explanation of how to interpret the DLC trailer that was 3 minutes long. You know what I mean? Like, but you need the context in order to in order to actually understand what is the story being told. Um, and I really hope that some elements of this gets out and starts to permeate the more mainstream, because the story being told is crazy interesting. Um, it's not about dragons and gods. It's like it's a human story about trauma and healing that and like shit that happened to a person. Um, so though that's gonna be my final analysis of the DLC trailer. I probably won't even make like a video that summarizes it because that's just to get views, and I don't know, it's a lot of work just to get views. But I will continue to keep working on the you know major storyline, and I hope to have it done before June when it comes out. So that way, if more people by then are interested and it has somehow permeated the more mainstream channels, then I think the DLC will hold a lot more value to that. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep, exactly. Like at the surface level, it's very under like it's easy to understand because everybody goes through trauma. And like you can kind of understand like if that happened to somebody that you cared about, like you could understand. Like you can picture their world crumbling, their inner world crumbling when something like that happens. And Miyazaki is just so brilliant that he brings that to life in a game. But man, it really it hangs people up. Wish there were more studies into dreams in our world. Thanks, man, for doing this. Appreciate your perspective. Hey, thanks, man. Thanks, Race. Um, yeah, man. Thanks for hopping on. I hope you can continue to join. Your input is valuable. So, and everybody that watched, appreciate you all. If you haven't, I mean, go back, replay the game, like with this in mind, and like see if it makes sense to you. Yeah, I'd be curious to, because it's kind of like how I like to do it now is like especially with the DLC out and the more like um, the more that we seem to be right and like America's going there to heal and it needs Mikola, and I think all of these little things like the Bridge of Sacrifice and Weeping Peninsula, and there's going to be so many of those things that we missed in our first playthrough that like will reconnect, and have a deeper meaning to them. So maybe I'll start a, you know, a live stream of just playing it and doing a deep dive, and then we can go super deep on those since there's no like agenda. But I appreciate that, Uncle Fred. Thanks, buddy. We shall see. We'll see in June. But until then, guys, take care of yourself.